Hey everyone, it's Lexie. So in today's video I'll be sharing with you all of the books that I ended up reading over the month of July. So I read a total of 6 books, which I think is pretty good because for a while I went a couple days without reading, like a week, but I still managed to read quite a bit. I went back home to Canada, and usually when I'm visiting everyone, like, I don't tend to read as much, hence why I was like, okay, I'm not off to a good start, but I surprised myself and managed to finish 6 books, so that is exciting. And then we'll be going, August is gonna be crazy, school starts up again, my cousin's getting married, so we have to go back to Canada, so it'll be an exciting month. But it's funny with these books, I realized afterwards when I was compiling everything, a lot of them were historical fiction, specifically focusing on France during World War II, so I thought that was a little bit funny coincidence. But yeah, there's some books that I'm really excited to talk to you guys about, so without further ado, let's get started. So first, starting out the month, I ended up reading the Tales and Teacups book club picks for the months of July and August, which was Midnight at the Blackbird Cafe by Heather Weber. And this is one that I was really excited about. It sounded like a fun contemporary book with some magical realism thrown into it, and so I had high hopes, and I really love the cover here too, so I ended up being a little bit disappointed with this book. I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars, and basically this premise of this story is it follows Anna Kate, who goes back to her mother's hometown after her grandmother's passed away, and in her will it asked her to run the cafe for a few months, and then afterwards she can decide what she wants to do with it. So while she's there, she's trying to put the pieces together of why her mother ended up running away from this town, learning more about her father who passed away before she was born, and then also kind of trying to recreate the ingredients for the famous blackbird pie, which essentially allows people who eat the pie to be visited by their loved ones who passed away in their sleep. So I think this one had a lot going for it. I am always a sucker for like small southern towns in the summertime and just throwing in a little bit magical realism. I've always enjoyed books like that, especially ones by Sarah Addison Allen, which kind of feature that small town feel with some magical realism thrown into it. But I felt this one just felt like a really cheesy Hallmark movie. It was very predictable, and I never felt like the characters were developed enough to really get attached to them or the plot. Like I said, it was very predictable, and sometimes in the dialogue I was just cringing because I'm like, I'm just watching like a C grade film on Hallmark. And yeah, I think some people can be really into that, but for me, I wanted more from this. I wanted more kind of substantial character growth, and I wanted to be attached to the plot and characters. I always felt like I was kept at arm's length, and the characters were very one-dimensional, and they didn't have a lot of growth throughout the book. So overall, I was a little bit disappointed with this one, but I don't know. It was not bad, but it wasn't great. So this is one that took me by surprise, and is The Girl with the Louding Voice by Abby DeRay. And this one, honestly, I wouldn't have picked this one up by myself if it wasn't for a book club pick for my book club that I'm a part of with my lab mate and her friends. And so this is because the title was a little bit different, but this one honestly blew me away. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. So it follows a Dooney who is a teenager growing up in this small northern town in Nigeria. And so while this is going on, she ends up getting kind of sold away to a husband who is very abusive, but she has always wanted to find her louding voice, which is how she describes being able to have an education and stand up for herself and those who are not able to do so. And it follows her journey with her kind of going through different, tragedies in her life trying to get an education. And I love this one. And what's really unique too is it's in the narration style. It's told from a Dooney's kind of like broken English dialogue, so it's not written in perfect English, and it did take a little bit of while to get used to kind of reading in that kind of choppy, not grammatically correct English, but once you got used to it, I think it really added a new dimension to the character. And just seeing all that Aduni had to persevere in order to get an education, I thought was really important. There are many different important themes in here as well in regards to having creating systems that allow women access to education and how education can be a platform for women to stand up for themselves. And I thought that was really important, and just all the hardships she had to go to just to find her louding voice. I was rooting from her from the beginning, and it was really well written. So like I said, I gave this a 4 to 5 stars. I think you guys would really like it. It has a really important message in here, and like I said, I was blown away. So next up, I ended up picking a much anticipated book, and it is The Paris Library by Janet Skeslien Charles. I can never pronounce the second name there, but this is one that I was really excited about. So it follows a girl who is living in France kind of right at the beginning of World War II, and she ends up working at the American Library in Paris. And so while the war breaks out, the kind of library becomes a sanctuary, not only for the people that go there, but it becomes a way to provide distractions to people who are going through terrible times. So whether it is, you know, secretly trying to get books to people who have been banned from reading, such as the Jewish people in kind of Paris at this time, supplying books to troops that are overseas. And I think it really showcases the power that words and books and stories have. And then we also get kind of a present day storyline that takes place in the 1980s, where we follow this young girl whose neighbor is a older woman who's from Paris, and she's very curious about this. So they end up forming a small relationship where she kind of learns more about Oldies, who is the young girl growing up in Paris at the time, and her story, and it kind of goes off from there. But I really like this. Again, I think like any book nerd will really love this, and just kind of how important it is to preserve stories and cultures, and you know, like in being able to share that with people, I think is really important. I did find some of the pacing of this to be a little bit off sometimes, like it would just kind of skip a couple years and then the story would just kind of continue after that. But overall, I really loved the characters in here. I grew to really love even just some of the random library patrons, and I felt like it was a good kind of transition between the past and present storylines as well. So overall, like I said, I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. I think it's a really solid World War II historical fiction novel, and I think many of you will like this as well. So unfortunately, the last 3 books were just kind of mediocre, so I didn't end the month off on a good note, but nevertheless, you know, I did enjoy some parts of this book. And so the next one that I ended up reading was The Scent Keeper by Erica Bauermeister, and this is one that I had really high expectations for, and it really just kind of fell flat. So overall, I gave this a 2 out of 5 stars. And the premise of the story is that we follow Emmeline, who when we first are introduced to her, she's growing up on this remote island with her father, who's kind of run away from his problems, and he and his daughter are now living on this kind of remote island together. And what is unique is that the dad is very much into scents and preserving scents in these jars, and he doesn't really tell her much about what the significance of these jars and the special papers that hold these scents. So Emmeline is very much how she perceives the world is through her nose, and I did think reading a book from that kind of sense was really that kind of one of the 5 senses was really interesting, and just kind of how she perceived her world. But I felt like the book Emmeline has a total disregard for her actions and how they impact those around her. I found her to be really unlikable and self-centered, and I just wasn't really that invested in her story. And I feel like there was only like 2 really good characters that I really enjoyed, but everyone else was really selfish, and I didn't understand the pacing of it. It was kind of all over the place, and I just couldn't find like my footing in this, and like the epilogue just did not make sense in my eyes. But yeah, so I was a little disappointed with this one. I felt like it had high hopes. It was very kind of similar to Where the Crawdad Sings in terms of like a girl kind of living out in isolation in nature, and I felt like this book had a lot of potential, but it just didn't utilize a lot of, you know, what it had going for it, which is unfortunate because I do really love the cover here. But yeah, this one just wasn't really good. Like I said, the characters were so selfish and they would just make stupid decisions that didn't make sense. And yeah, it was just all over the place and I was really disappointed. Although it was interesting kind of reading something from kind of a kind of small perspective, just how this character was with sense. I was like, she's kind of like a dog, and didn't find it very believable in terms of her ability of smelling things. Like, I felt like there was a suspension of disbelief that had to go with it. So yeah, overall I wasn't the biggest fan of this book. And lastly, I have these two books that are by the same author, and it works out because I didn't realize they were kind of continuations of each other, and I just happened to read them in the right order, so I was very lucky with that. So the first book ended up being the Beekeeper's Promise, and then the second book ended up being the Dressmaker's Gift, both by Fiona Valpy. And so these ones are again the ones that take place during France during World War II, and they follow two sisters and their different experiences. So in the Beekeeper's Promise, I always forget their names, we follow Elaine, who is this small town girl living in a very rural area, and it follows her experience with kind of working with the resistance when her town ends up being invaded by Nazis. And of course she is a beekeeper, so we follow her kind of experience throughout the war and just her you know, kind of experience working with the resistance, which I did feel like that was like a pretty solid World War II historical fiction retelling. I did find some parts of it to be a little bit dry, and then the pacing was a little bit off, but nevertheless it was like a solid like 3 out of 5 star read. There is this kind of weird present day storyline kind of thrown into this. We follow Abby, who is kind of down in her luck, and she ends up staying at the mill house that Elaine used to live in during this time, and she ends up learning about Elaine's story, and it kind of goes in from there. I didn't feel like that present day storyline didn't add anything to this story at all. Like, I just honestly was just like skipping those chapters because I'm like, this doesn't really add much to it. But I was a little bit disappointed in that part, but I did like enjoy some of Elaine's chapters. I did find that because it was kind of more of like the small town feel, like she was kind of kept out of the loop for a lot of things, and so it was kind of a little bit boring at sometimes because not a lot would be happening. But I did really enjoy kind of the characters from that time period and getting to learn kind of more of the resistance that took place in the French countryside. I thought was interesting. And then so luckily I read these in this order. And then the Dressmaker's Gift follows Elaine's sister Meryl and her experience being working in the resistance, but this one takes place in Paris, so we get a little bit more of a kind of broad view of the war, which I enjoyed a little bit better. I think this one is a little bit more, the author gets a little bit better at developing the characters and expanding upon this very kind of specific part of the resistance, which I enjoyed. So it follows Meryl and her experience with the resistance along with her 2 other flatmates that are involved as well. And then this one too has a kind of present day storyline, which was a little bit more relevant because it actually deals with one of the characters that's going to be in the past day. But again, I didn't feel like it added a lot to the story. I did enjoy this one a little bit more. I felt like it was more suspenseful. I felt like the pacing was better, and I was just more invested in that World War II plotline. So I gave this one a 3.5 out of 5 stars. So that's it, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments below what some of the books that you read this month were and all of that fun stuff. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, and I will see you guys next time. Bye, guys.